In this video, we are going to look at how to set up animations using CSS. So before we get into the CSS for this, I just want to show you that all the HTML here is just an empty div. And what we've done with the empty div is we've given it a width and a height, set display flex on the body, height, min height, VH, just to kind of get the entire frame occupied here. And then we've set margin auto on that div and a background of coral to center it and give it that color. So let's look at how we set up an animation for any element within CSS. So first and foremost, you need to be looking at properties that can be animated. There are some CSS properties that cannot be animated, such as display none and display block. You cannot interpolate between the non-existence of something and the existence of something, whereas something like opacity, where you're animating from an opacity of 0, the element is still there, you just can see through it, to an opacity of 100%. That is a property which has values between the base value and what you're animating to. So first and foremost, we need to look at properties that we want to animate, or that we can animate rather, with CSS. So in this example, what we're going to do is we're going to build this animation, and I'll just show you what this looks like when it's done. We're going to build an animation that behaves like this. So it's going to rotate, the corners are going to round, and the colors are going to change, and then it's going to go back in the opposite direction. And all of that's going to happen infinitely, and we're going to have this little like droplet look to the thing as it moves back and forth between all of these different states. So to set something like that up, we need to first declare our animation and then apply it. So to declare an animation within CSS, we need to use at keyframes. At keyframes says to the web browser, I am going to set up an animation that I want you to use at a certain point. Then we are going to give it a name. You can give it any name you want. It's just like classes or any other attribute where the value doesn't really matter. In this case, we're going to call the animation rounded. So this is how we're going to refer to the animation once we've declared it. So from here, we need to set up our kind of baseline. And what we have is we have border radius of 0, 0, 0, 0. So that means border radius top left, border radius top right, border radius bottom right, border radius bottom left are all 0. The background is coral, which is what it is. That's what we've set kind of at our baseline up here in our CSS. And we have a transform here with the rotate function of 0 degrees, so it's not rotated. So basically, what we're doing here is we're setting the baseline, which we already have in place. By default, divs do not have any border radius, so that's where that 0, 0, 0 comes from. We have said that we want it to be coral for the background, so we're stating that as the beginning stop. And then it's not rotated, so we're just setting a baseline of transform rotate 0 degrees, so it's not rotated. So when you're inside of a keyframes, we have at keyframes, the name of the animation that we're going to refer to later, and then an opening curly bracket. We need to set up different stops. So you can think of it exactly like keyframes that you use in your animation classes, where we want to go from one stop to the next stop to the next stop, and we want to specify what changes at each of those stops. Now, you can do this any number of different ways. You can, if you have like a two-stop animation, you don't actually need to do percentages. You can say from in 2, and that would be the equivalent of saying 0%, 100%. But for what we're doing here, we're going to have like a 5-stop animation where we're going to change things as we go through. So we've got 0% is one stop, 25% is the next stop, then 50%, 75%, and 100%. And at each one of those stops, we're going to change something. So from 0% to 25%, we're going to animate the top left corner by 50%. We're going to change, we're going to animate the border radius of the top left corner to 50%. We're going to change the background to dark salmon from coral, and then we're going to rotate it 45 degrees. So that is 1/5 of the way through this animation. Or 1/4 of the way through this animation. Then halfway through the animation, we're going to animate both the top left and top right corners to have a border radius of 50%. The background is going to be animated to Indian red. We're going to rotate it 90 degrees. And then 3/4 of the way through the animation, we're going to have top left, top right, bottom right, border radius all set to 50%. We're going to animate the background color to light coral, and then we're going to rotate it 135 degrees. So again, we're doing like 45-degree stops with each rotation. Finally, all the way through the animation, we're going to animate the border radius of every corner to 50%. We're going to animate the background color to dark salmon, and then we are going to rotate it 180 degrees. So this is our animation. We've set up our stops. We've got our baseline here, and then we're incrementally changing the border radius, the background, and the transform rotate value as we go through this animation. So now that we've declared this animation, we need to use it. So the way that you do it, the way that you apply an animation that you've declared is through a variety of animation-specific CSS properties. So we're going to step through them one by one, and we're going to look at the longhand version of this. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to use the animation name property. And the animation name property will take the value of whatever animation, whatever name you've given to your keyframes declaration. So in our case, it's round it. So we're using the animation name property. We're giving it the value of round it because that's what we have declared that animation to be within our keyframes block here. Now you'll notice that nothing is happening yet. We've said animation name, but it's not doing anything. And the reason for that is we have not declared any behavior that we want the animation to take. So next up, we're going to look at animation duration. So the animation duration property is going to take a value of either milliseconds or seconds, as defined by either ms or s, respectively. And that's basically going to say how long we want that animation to take place over. So I am wanting my rounded animation to take 2 seconds to play all the way through. So we'll save that. An optional property is animation delay. Animation delay works very similar to transition delay, which we learned in Web 1. Animation delay says how long do we want to wait before we start this animation playing. You don't need to have it, but I have it here for the sake of demonstration. So we're going to save that. Next up, we have animation iteration count. So how many times do we want this animation to play through? Do we want it to go through once, twice? It really is totally up to you, but in our case, we are going to set it to infinite. And at this point, if I were to hit run, still, there we go. We've got our animation started. Now, if you look at this, it's kind of funky because it gets to the end of the animation and then just kind of like jump cuts back to the start. And that's not exactly what we want. So the property that deals with that is animation direction. Animation direction it basically tells the browser how to treat your animation when it gets to the end of the keyframes declaration. So in our case, what's happening now is it's getting to the end of the keyframes and then it's just starting over. But if you were to use the alternate property to the animation direction value, it will get to the end of the animation and then it will go backwards, utilizing the same properties as declared in the animation. So I'm going to rerun this. And now, as it goes through, you notice it just goes backwards when it's done. Every time it gets to the end of the animation, it starts going the opposite direction. And that's super useful. There are a lot of different values that you can give to animation direction. Specifically, think about an animation that you only want to play once, and then when the animation is over, you want it to stay you want the element to stay in the position that it is animated to. There are values that can make that happen. Like think about a new page sliding in from off screen and then like fading from 0 opacity to full opacity. You would want that to stay full opacity and in the position that it's in rather than going back to its initial starting place. And animation direction is the property that will make that happen for you. Lastly, we have animation timing function. An animation timing function is just like transition timing function, and in that it kind of dictates the feel of the animation. So this can take the same values that uh, transition timing function take in terms of like ease in, ease in, out, linear, etc. Or you can declare a custom cubic Bezier function that kind of sets that animation up for you. I have a cubic Bezier function here that makes it like feel a little snappy when it goes into each point in the animation, but you have total control over that. So that is the longhand method of applying an animation that you have declared with keyframes using the animation name, animation duration, animation delay, animation iteration count, animation timing function, and animation direction. There is a shorthand, and it is just the animation property. Personally, I find it incredibly difficult to read, so I shy away from it, but you can use a shorthand with just the animation property. So this is functionally equivalent to all of these 6 lines. So we've got the name, the duration, the delay, the iteration count, the timing function, and the direction. To me, I find it difficult to remember what order these things go in order for the animation to behave the way that I want. So I kind of defer to longhand, but you might be different, and that's totally fine. So one quick note, in Firefox, we have some really handy animation tools. So if we do inspect element, and then over in the right-hand column, same place where we have layout and fonts and changes and things like that, if we look at this drop-down and go to animations, then I get a little timeline down here that shows which properties are being animated and what they're doing at a specific point in the keyframes, and that's pretty useful. Also, if we were to look at the specific element, this empty div, you have the same tools that you have with transition, where if you were to click on this little yin-yang looking symbol next to animation timing function, you can kind of play around with your curves and things like that and adjust the timing function and then change it if you want to. So that's nice and handy too. If you are a Chrome user, Chrome also has really good animation tools. So let's open that up. Paste it in here. And then if we look at the animation tools in here, go to elements. Let's see. Animations. So we've got, let's see here. Let's reload so I can see it. Okay. Okay, to be perfectly honest, I am not super versed with Chrome, so I don't know exactly how theirs works, but I know that for people who really like Chrome developer tools, that this is pretty handy. So you can actually see down here, once we got to that point where the animation had loaded, you can click on the different keyframes and you can see the things that are being animated here. So you can kind of see the curve of the way that those things are being animated. There's some stuff with the CodePen UI in there as well. But if we go to our animation where we're doing these things, there we go. That's the name of Round It. And we can go to each frame in our animation. You can kind of visualize the things that are changing with each frame. So that's pretty handy too within Chrome. Okay, so that is CSS animations. Feel free to include that in your final project. It works just the same as any other CSS, so you can include this within the additional CSS within WordPress, and hopefully that helps.